Before we get started on this next panel, I would like to introduce our representative from the Indian Space Research Organization. We're very pleased that he was able to join us, even though he was able to get here today. He unfortunately had his visa approved very late by the U.S. Embassy, but we're very pleased to have Parzawan Sunil with us. So, this next panel is unique design and performance considerations for women in space, and we have a very good moderator for this panel, Bonnie Dunbar. Bonnie has flown 5 times on the shuttle and has a lot of experience in space and has been on the space station as well. Before she came to her recent job, which is at the University of Houston, she was president and CEO of the Museum of Flight in Seattle, Washington, and made a real impact there with a lot of changes in getting a real outreach program going there at the museum and in the Pacific Northwest. And she has recently come to lead the STEM Center at the University of Houston and is leading that activity now, and we're pleased to have her back here in Houston. This next subject is a very important one. We talked yesterday about spacesuits, and we didn't really get down to the detail of talking about the impact of different sizes of the spacesuit, what effect that might have on utilization of the astronauts for EVA. But this U.S. spacesuit that we have, which has a hard upper torso, they ordered only a limited number of hard upper torsos, which restricts right away which astronauts can fit in that spacesuit. Back before we got the present spacesuit we had, we used to have spacesuits to fit everyone. And the spacesuits we used on the moon, the spacesuits that we used for EVAs on Skylab really performed very well, and we had no problems with them from the astronaut standpoint. But we decided to build a new spacesuit at the same time we embarked on the shuttle program with a hard upper torso. And of course, as I say, when you went to a spacesuit where you're only going to have sizes small, medium, and large, that doesn't fit everyone. So I think as we look to the future and see what kind of spacesuits we'll need for exploration, that is certainly a consideration we need to think about for the future. Not only the points that were being made yesterday by Mike Gernhardt and others, but certainly the design considerations for women for exploration as well. So let me turn it over to our moderator, I think is a very good one to talk that subject.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abbey and Dr. Alford, for this opportunity for us to talk about a broader subject. We've all discussed this among ourselves, and to a large respect, what we're talking about is applicable to all the astronauts, okay? Because there's more in common between all of us, and gender, after 50 years, has become sort of incidental in a lot of respects. Last year we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Valentina Tereshkova's flight. So let me kind of frame it where we are. Today we're going to, in our brief comments, talk about human factors, human systems engineering, where we are, how we got there, where we need to go in the future. And your program has a number of other topics down there. So when we get to the Q&A, please feel free to ask us. We may not be able to answer it, but we have some experts in the audience, such as Dr. Barrett and Dr. Jennings up there, who can answer some of those questions. So to date, 57 women have flown in space from a little over 530 individual astronauts. We've had one from the UK, one from South Korea, one from France, 2 from Canada, 2 from China most recently, 2 from Japan, 3 from the Soviet Union, and we should be getting a 4th one soon, and 45 from the United States. Form, fit, function, performance, and safety are all wrapped up in the crew equipment, personal equipment, and EVA suits, everything else that must fit the astronaut core. And there is no such thing as a standard human. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a moment, because you probably saw that or heard about the 5th percentile, the 95th percentile. That's an effective way to talk about it, but no one person is that percentile in all parts of their body. As Mr. Abbey mentioned, when we started the Apollo program, it was decided through processes that are documented in a lot of history books. There was a lot of discussions about who do we pick to go to the moon. It wasn't automatically decided that it would be test pilots. There were many other communities that proposed skydivers and mountain climbers and different occupations. It finally focused on test pilots. And I understand in the Soviet Union it was a combination of flying and skydiving, because in the original vehicles you actually had to jump out of the vehicle before it hit the ground. So there were different skill sets that went into that selection. And the same with the space shuttle era as well, different skill sets that went into it. But during the Apollo program, Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and Skylab, once the crew members were selected, then suits were designed to fit them. And not only just to fit them well for comfort, to fit them well for safety. Any of you that have flown high-performance airplanes, scuba dived, mountain climbed, been in extreme sports, even downhill skiing, know how important it is to have the equipment that fits you well. Well, the shuttle, and to a large extent to the efforts of Mr. Abbey as well and the leadership team, the shuttle was designed as a vehicle that had two policy differences. First of all, it was designed to have international partners, very much like the International Space Station. We invited the Canadians to come in, as Dr. Lane mentioned, to work on design the robotic arm. We invited the Europeans in to build the space lab. We had the Japanese in discussions, and they were going to fly a space lab called SLJ. So it was the invitation of that large international community that also led to the standards on size. And then the other community that was invited to fly for the first time in the United States was women. So these anthropometric standards, form, fit, and function, how does the vehicle, how should the cockpit design, how should the seats be designed, how should the suits be designed, were all captured in a document that we came to know as, I think, NASA Standard 3000. And to a large extent, it tried to take what we had learned off of prior flights in Skylab, as well as anthropometric measurements across many populations, and try to capture that into design standards. When I arrived in 1980 into the astronaut corps, every effort was made to try to fit me as a selected crew member into the equipment. And at that time, there were 5 EVA suit sizes. They went from custom-made to off-the-shelf, pick an arm, put an arm on, so forth. There was the extra small, the medium, the large, and the extra large. By the time we started Space Station, there were only 2 suit sizes left, the medium and the large. And the rest of the equipment that fit with it, arms and legs, didn't always go right with the equipment. And why did that happen? Well, even though the huts changed size, the neck rings did not. One size helmet, one size neck ring for what was called the 95th percentile Caucasian male, or as my instructors would call it, the big head. Well, when you put little heads in big heads there and try to design and scale a hard upper torso to a one-size neck ring, you end up compromising the design. And that happened all along the design place. So at the end, we ended up selecting crew members who fit suits to do certain functions. And that has created not a situation just for a large percentage of the females, but for our ethnic components as well. For example, just to give you a scaling parameter, looking up here, because you saw some very large 95th percentile males yesterday. I am, as a Caucasian, in height, 75th percentile female. That means I'm taller than 75% of all the other Caucasian females. Chiaki is a 50th percentile Asian female. I'm also the same height as a 50th percentile Asian male. We're not the first to discover this. About 15 years ago, we had a group from the Air Force at Johnson Space Center. Maybe some of you were there. And they were in doing laser mapping of our population. In fact, they'd been on all the major continents because they were selling airplanes. And they were finding the airplanes didn't fit every pilot on every continent, particularly in Asia. And using this high-tech laser scanning, they were actually putting that into computer programs and using very sophisticated means of designing cockpits and crew equipment. So from my perspective, it wasn't just about fitting the position, it was also about safety. I've climbed mountains, I scuba dive, downhill skiing where we have to wear helmets now. And you can go to any sports store in the country, including REI, the very famous one, and buy any size, including kids' equipment, to be safe. So this is not rocket science, it's how we approach it. But the only way we're going to learn about where we need, what has worked really well, and that's what my panel is going to talk about as well, and where we need to apply some more energy, and this is again one of those questions, as Dr. Barrett said, has to go to upper management to consider, is how can we fix this for the future, particularly as we go into another decade on the International Space Station and as we go into exploration. As we look at the future, this is one of those fixes that has to happen. So my panel today is, we have a couple substitutions from the original program. Both Dr. Coleman and Dr. Whitson send their regrets. They both worked with the Russian programs and very much enjoyed it. They had some other commitments. So today we have from IBMP representing the cosmonauts, the women cosmonauts from Russia, Inessa Kozlovskaya. We have from Japan, Chiaki Mukai. And we have from the United States, Stephanie Wilson and Nicole Stott. I'm going to introduce each one of them because I think it's important to provide you with a little bit of background so you can appreciate some of their perspectives because they are also engineers and physicians. So I'm going to start, first of all, with Stephanie, since she's here to my left. Now, Stephanie has a Bachelor of Science degree in Engineering Science from Harvard University and a Master of Science in Aerospace Engineering from the University of Texas, and we'll forgive her for that. That's in Austin, okay. She worked for 2 years in industry with the Martin Marietta Astronautics Group in Denver, Colorado, as a loads and dynamics engineer for the Titan IV. She worked for the Jet Propulsion Labs in California as a member of the Attitude and Articulation Control Subsystem for the Galileo spacecraft. She was selected by NASA in 1996, and she's flown 3 space flights, STS-121 in 2006, 120 in 2007, and 131 in 2010. She's logged 42 days in space. Chiaki gave me a bio which was far too modest, so I'm going to elaborate a little bit. Before she was selected as a Japanese astronaut, she was a professor in cardiovascular surgery. She has both a PhD in physiology and medicine, and she's board certified as a cardiovascular surgeon. She's flown 2 space flights, and she was the first Japanese woman into space. During her 566 hours in space, she conducted a number of life science and space medicine experiments, and currently she works for JAXA's Center for Applied Space Medicine and Human Research, which promotes the utilization of the space environment in the International Space Station for future human space exploration, and we heard from her earlier contributing some very good comments to the discussion. Nicole Stott received a Bachelor of Science in Aeronautical Engineering from Embry-Riddle in 1987 and a Master of Science in Engineering Management from the University of Central Florida. She's an instrument-rated private pilot, among other things, and a member of the Experimental Aircraft Association. She started her career as a structural design engineer in Pratt & Whitney, where she worked with the Advanced Engines Group, performing structural analysis of advanced engine designs. She joined the Kennedy Space Center in 1988, and she's held a variety of positions within the shuttle processing organization, including the vehicle operations engineer, the convoy commander, the shuttle flow director for Endeavour, and the orbiter project engineer for Columbia. And she's also supported the ISS program as a member of the Space Station Hardware Integration Office, which is located in California. And she's also been a flight simulation engineer on the shuttle training aircraft. She was selected in 2000, and she was, before flying in 2006, was a crew member of the Nemo 9 mission, where she lived and worked with a 6-person crew in the longest duration Nemo mission to date, 18 days as an aquanaut in the Aquarius Undersea Research Habitat. She has flown 2 space flights with a total of 104 days. She was the flight engineer on ISS Expedition 20 and 21. She performed 1 spacewalk. She flew the robotic arm for the first track and capture of the Japanese cargo vehicle HTV. Her second flight was STS-133, the 39th and final mission of the Space Shuttle Discovery. She's performed robotic operations for the installation of the ELC-4 and PMM on the International Space Station. And she currently works in the astronaut office as our space station integration engineer. You have already met Inessa at several times in the past, and she's also modest. She didn't give me her full resume, but if you look at her published papers, you'll get a pretty good idea of it. So with that, I would like to go ahead and start with Stephanie.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Bonnie. Thank you for the introduction. Also, thanks for the invitation to be here at this space medicine panel, and also to Mr. Albee for hosting the panel and the invitation from the Banker Institute. And I'd like to welcome also my esteemed panelists. It's wonderful to be part of this program and to be sharing this opportunity with you. As I entered Johnson Space Center from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, I was able to bring, along with my engineering experience, that experience of operating robotic spaceflight, as I had worked on the Galileo spacecraft and had an opportunity to do mission support work for that robotic spacecraft. When I entered and trained with the class of 1996, we were hired to help build, live, and work upon the International Space Station. It was an interesting time as we prepared to embark upon the assembly of the space station. We were coming up with new procedures and processes for the science. We were trying to find ways to work collaboratively with our international partners, coming up with procedures for how we would operate with our Mission Control Center, and solving the puzzle of how to assemble this enormous laboratory with robotics and EVA. So it was certainly an exciting time to be a part of the NASA family. I quickly learned that during the training, I heavily relied on the rigor that I brought from my educational programs in studying engineering courses. The discipline in that training that was learned in college and graduate school was a tremendous asset. And as our population is largely scientists and engineers and doctors, we all bring that rigor to our training program. As candidates, we undergo several training opportunities. We learn to fly a NASA T-38 jet trainers. If we are not military, if we come without flight experience, we're sent to military bases to learn how to fly other aircraft such as T-6s. We participate in outdoor leadership training, and also in underwater habitat training. So we have an opportunity to expand our operational capability and strengthen the rigor of the programs that we brought from traditional education. And as compared to ground-based studies, since our population is largely scientists and engineers and doctors, and we have that rigor, we have been able to be successful as crew members, as women, as men, as members of representing other communities. As women, we have docked the orbiter, we have landed the orbiter, we have participated in spacewalks, we've commanded both the shuttle and the space station, we've participated in robotics, so we've been able to be present in all areas that are representative in the spaceflight. There are some areas for improvement, but through the 57 women that have flown, we have been able to be, at least in a small numbers, participants in all of the areas. Along the lines of equipment for training, I believe that funding is largely a constraint for some of the equipment variability. When I entered the program in 1996, we had a launch and entry suit for the shuttle, which quickly evolved into an advanced crew escape suit, which had smaller sizes that would fit a larger population. We are currently involved in efforts to design an exploration EVA suit. So I was involved in a fit check this week for a smaller size, and for that design effort, they are starting with the smaller sizes and then scaling up to the larger sizes. We have found in some of the design considerations, if you start with the larger size and scale it down, you simply don't have room for all of the components. And so they're looking at creative ways to place the display and command module so that it's not in the front in the work envelope. And there are some other trades and changes that have been made in the helmet and also in the arm mobility. So those are efforts that are underway and moving in the right direction. There are some constraints that we're not able to change. For instance, with our Soyuz launch suit, the seated height is limited by the seat pan or the seat liner, so that constraint comes with that design, but we are able to fit a population of astronauts in that suit. So I believe that for the future, it is important to have flight-like equipment for training in all sizes, and it's also important to have the funding available so that the teams and the engineers can go forward with a design effort that results in a wide range of suit sizes, one that fits our entire population of astronauts.
Thank you. Yes, Shaki.
Maybe I can talk about two things. The one is just a hardware issue, and the other one is just a medical issue, which I think related to the gender-weighted medical limitation. So the first hardware issue, I think we need the very good urine collection system for women. During the space shuttle, maybe in the International Space Station, you might have a very good one, but when I flew on the International space shuttle mission, there was a UMS, the urine collection system, but it sometimes dilute the urine when we collect the urine, and also the male and female, the anatomy is very different. So, of course, and then I think we are very complicated. So I think the men are simpler. So, but nowadays, like for Graham, I think I agree, like omics and proteomics are very much promoted, which means we need some fluid type of samples, like urine is a very good sample and very important. So we really need to collect urine comfortably and enjoyably for women. So we need that as a hardware challenge. And then if I think about the medical related challenge, I think it's maybe the radiation issue is one of them, and we have already talked about this yesterday. Like women, especially the eligible women for having a child, should have some the lower level of total amount of the dose for the children's issue and child issue, and also the protecting the cancer issue. So the radiation is one of the issue which are different flow between men and women. And the other issue is it's very difficult to find women exclusive issue. And then if I think about the exploration or that kind of type, maybe the physical issue is categorized into the muscle work versus brain work. And I think that women are very good at for brain work rather than the muscle work. And then whatever the modern science can support the muscle work activities like hydraulics, thanks to the hydraulics or that kind, then it makes the men and women difference much smaller. So if I think about the International Space Station or wherever the microgravity is concerned, now the weight doesn't matter. Of course, there's a mass. But if we do some training on the ground in 1G condition, so maybe the heavy things is heavy for women. So that is the issue. So the ISS time may not be a very big issue for the muscle work type, but if we think about the exploration on Moon or Mars, now we have the gravity, so that the weight will matter on us. So which means maybe some space suits which not only protect the human body from the vacuum environment, but also if it can assist some muscle work for women or whatever, not only women, but the men, including everybody who has a less power on the muscle, then it makes them easier to dig the hole or whatever the exploration on Martian surface or moon surface. So that's what I can think of right now.
Thank you very much. Nicole?
Okay, and I think I'll present a little bit of a some general comments here, I think, that kind of combine what Stephanie and Chiaki have already said. But first of all, I'd like to start out by saying that I feel really fortunate to be able to participate in a panel like this today. I think we have a very positive story to share, and there are challenges out there, but I think it is a very positive story. I'm very thankful that we live in a time where female astronauts, or really female anything, are just our norm. And I can also say I feel blessed to have had the opportunity to fly in space and to have had some really pretty wonderful experiences along the way, both before and after flying in space. We had our bios presented, but I always go back and I think about, in terms of how did I get here. I grew up in a family where flying was just a part of it. We hung out at the local airport. My dad built a couple of sport aircraft as I was growing up, and he shared that passion with me, not just in the cockpit flying with him, but in the garage building the airplane, out at the airport, helping do with the final assembly and whatever I could as a young child, and that really got into me. I think it was probably the single greatest impact on what I chose, and very positive impact on what I chose and how I was inspired to choose both my educational and my career path. And I think that growing up around airplanes, of course, being with flying people, and if you know flying people, they're kind of a group of their own, and flying as well, I knew for sure I wanted to do something that had to do with flying. I knew I wanted to fly myself, and even more than that, I knew I wanted to know why things fly. And that kind of evolved into if you're going to fly somewhere, what better place maybe to fly than space? And let's learn about how rockets fly, and and very kind of a simplistic idea about it at that time, but it was very formative for me. And it certainly put me in a place where I had the background to very fortunately be hired with NASA at Kennedy Space Center and work up close and personal with space shuttle hardware and with the people that do the care and feeding of those vehicles as well. And then to come here to Johnson Space Center and work as a member of the aircraft operations group, flying as a flight engineer on a shuttle training aircraft. And I don't think I thank Mr. Abbey enough for that opportunity, which turned out to be probably this kind of blessing in disguise, I think, in terms of a better understanding of just the operational world that we live in when it comes to space flight and being the member of a space flight crew. And so I know that was like a little recap of the bio, but in addition to those kind of career and education things, I think we look across our office, and I have this picture of my astronaut class of 2000 that I show to kids and we're in our funny bug antenna, and we all have these goofy faces. And, but I look at that, and it shows me that every single person in there ultimately had this goal of becoming an astronaut. But in every one of their faces, I see their personality now. But I also see that there was a different path for everyone there. Whether you were a boy or a girl, there was a different path for how you got there. And that could be, Megan, who's in my class, who was an oceanographer, Karen, who was a thermodynamics person and did, thermal and crew system stuff. We had flight test engineers, medical doctors, geophysicists, and aerospace engineers. Though that mix is very important, and I think it's especially important when you get assigned to a crew of 6 on a space station. I think the worst thing, and maybe Walt can confirm this, that you would want to have is 5 more of you up there with you. I think that variety and the different experiences that people have had, both from their educational and career background, but also from outside, the interests that they have, whether it's woodworking or gardening or flying planes or scuba diving or painting, all of these kinds of things go into the kind of person you are. And I just feel really fortunate that mix that I had, that exposure I had, the experiences I had, put me in a place where it made me a reasonable choice for astronaut selection. And so when I look across all of my, my classmates and my crewmates, I think that mix is very important. I think it's not driven by whether you're a man or a woman, and gender driven in any way. I think we've shown, like Stephanie said, that that the female astronauts as well as the male astronauts have done all of the important roles on all of the programs that we've had so far. We live and we work very happily as crews on board space stations for long duration, and we're looking at year-long missions to come. And so I think we're here at a medical summit, so as Chiaki said, there's certainly the physiological aspect of things. Men and women are different, and I personally am very thankful for that. I think that's a good thing in the grand scheme of life. So, it works well for us, I think, as crew members for space flight. And what it comes down to, like I think Bonnie introduced, is that we have a human factors challenge out there. It's not a physiological challenge. It's not a gender-based thing. It really is an engineering problem that we just have to look at. How do we manage? How do we build? How do we say, here's how we can provide our whole entire astronaut population with the equipment that we need to fly safely and successfully complete our missions. And so, in closing, would just like to say that I'm really happy that we are here and that we can share a very positive story about how we all go forward, and I think are obligated to go forward together in this great adventure of space flight and space exploration.
Thank you very much. Inessa.
Моя ситуация, мое положение сегодня, оно, я бы сказала, несколько двусмысленное, потому что я, конечно, не была космонавтом, но я с большим удовольствием.
Is very unique. Of course, I've never been an astronaut or cosmonaut, but I'm more than happy to talk about the things I know about women cosmonauts. There are not a lot of them, but they're very distinguished and certainly deserve to be talked about. I can't really say why is it that in a country where women were free and empowered much earlier than anywhere else, because we didn't even know what it means to be unequal. What is this issue of inequality? But when it came to becoming a cosmonaut, we were faced with this inequality, where it suddenly became very difficult to become a cosmonaut. Because even in the conditions of wars, women were allowed to fight alongside men. We never had inequality in our industry or in the area of farming, but there are some professions, some industries, especially hazardous industries, where inequality still existed. So maybe it's because men are very protective of us women, but for some reason when it comes to military, aviation, work on a submarine, for example, working in areas associated with very high risks, men would prefer to leave those areas to men only. And it was very difficult, if not impossible, to penetrate those areas. And you had to get all sorts of special permits and approvals from generals and so forth. And I think somehow it trickled down to the area of space exploration as well. But I have to say that our lead designer, our head of space exploration, Professor Korolov, he was never of the opinion that women should not be cosmonauts. From the very beginning, he created a corps of women cosmonauts, and they would undergo the exact same training as men, although some of the training was adjusted specifically to women. And you were absolutely correct in saying that it was difficult to become part of this corps, but really there were two criteria for selection. First, it's your motivation and your drive. And two, your health, your performance. That was it. And if you look at our women cosmonauts, you will see that they have very different backgrounds. There are people who specialize in physics and mathematics, in industrial production. But today, only 3 of them have flown into space, although today we can probably say 4 because our 4th woman cosmonaut is supposed to launch in September. And she is actually a computer programmer. She added this new profession to the array of career specializations. Before, Tereshkova was part of the industrial world. The next woman cosmonaut was a pilot. And she was exposed to the world of flight and piloting since the very early age. And then it was Yelena Kondakova, who was an engineer. I want to say simply an engineer, but I don't think you can say simply an engineer because it's a pretty difficult field. So either way, we had all these different backgrounds represented. And we're continuing to select women into the cosmonaut corps. There's another woman, Yelena Serova, who will be flying in September. She's a computer programmer. And all 3 women who flew before were young women. They were flying prior to being married. And now we have a more mature representative. And she actually entered this new career field together with her husband. He is also very talented, very loyal. a person who really wants to be a cosmonaut, but unfortunately had to leave the cosmonaut corps. But Yelena is still there, and she will have to work the double shift, so to say. So she will have to fly as a cosmonaut for herself and for her husband. So we, as a humankind, went through several stages. And I'm talking about the intellectual level. And the latest stage was the stage when women were viewed as different to men somehow. And for some reason, this difference was somehow equated to women being lesser than. But when I was growing up, really, we were of the opinion that we were absolutely equal. There were absolutely no differences between men and women, and it was even strange that we had the childbearing capacity when men didn't. But now we arrived at the stage when we know that there are differences, but we also have the opportunities to do more detailed, more in-depth studies of women and men, which allows us to understand that, yes, there are differences, and they cannot be explained by just our differences in childbearing capacity, but there are some other physiological differences. There are some differences in mental or cognitive development, not in terms of better or worse, it's just different. And you were absolutely right in saying that we were selected on the basis of whether or not we can fit into a spacesuit. But that's not really optimal, because the work conditions and the environment for cosmonauts should be adjusted to different types of cosmonauts that exist. Of course, when we talk about performance and muscle strength, of course, we know that even from our experience in sports, women can be trained to even lift a truck, but do we really need that? And normally, the training load should be 30% less for women as compared to men, and that's actually quite good. If we look at the average women, although there is no such thing as an average woman, but let's just look at the theoretical average. When we're talking about working with technology and working with equipment, I have to say that, yes, men are maybe better adjusted to doing that. But maybe at some point we will develop our equipment in such a way that it would be that it would be very easy to use for both men and women. And yes, there are some physiological differences that dictate the design of the vehicle and special design considerations for privacy and so forth. Now, if we look at the genomics, then the scientists who study human genome say that women should definitely be part of the cosmonaut crew, especially for the long-duration flights. Because if you Just even imagine what would happen here on Earth if we have a colony that consists exclusively of men or exclusively of women. Those colonies would be at a very distinct disadvantage. But because of our nature, we have these different genders, and women are different to men. Let's talk about endurance, for example. Today we already know that a woman who can bear children and protect their children is much more adaptable to temperature changes, to load changes. Gravitational changes maybe as well, though we don't have any empirical evidence for that. But either way, if we look at an average representative of female gender, you can tell that women are much more adjustable, but not men.
Новые качества, новые соответствующие новым условиям качества в свое потомство, у них узкий,
although can impart their qualities to the next generation, are nonetheless much less adjustable. Some of them are okay with cold temperatures, some of them are okay with hot temperatures, but they can adjust to the whole range of temperatures. And you know what? That actually impacts their personality. From our experience of flying with women astronauts, showed some very interesting results. There were 7 women astronauts. I'm sorry, there were 7 astronauts that flew on the shuttle. For one of the flights, one of whom was a woman. It was Shannon. And I can't say who was better or worse, but I can tell you that Shannon was less problematic for us. She was much better adjusted. Initially, we had our doubts because she was a grandmother. She had grandchildren. She was pretty tall. And there were some other things that we were concerned about. You know, she told us, why do you want me to run on the treadmill as part of my training when I never even walk in real life? I'm either sitting down driving a car or I'm sitting down piloting a plane. If I need to get bread, I hop on my bike. I just don't walk at all. And here you want me to get on the treadmill and keep running, and not just keep running, but run with loaded bungees. But then, over the year of training, when everybody would go or leave for the lunch break, he wouldn't go to lunch. He would go to our lawn and walk on this lawn barefoot to develop her feet, the soles of her feet, to strengthen them so that she could run on the treadmill. And you know what happened on the treadmill? She had 2 companions, her 2 Yuris. They were absolutely opposite of her. They were less tall than she was, but they were so good in working with her. Shannon would run every day on a much harder treadmill. And nobody would create any special conditions for her, but her very being on board as part of this mixed crew, where men were trying to care of her, and she was trying to take care of them. It created a really good atmosphere. You know, when she got back from her flight, she was, we were testing her because one thing that is that is very typical for women in flight is the loss of the bone tissue. And we asked her, what medication were you taking? And she said, I wasn't taking any medication, but I was just doing a lot of physical training. But our men would say that they really tried to help her in any way they could, even if it meant sacrificing their own physical training as part of the countermeasures. So yes, the presence of women on board creates certain limitations. You can't use bad language, and you can do some other things, but at the same time, you know, when you think about Savitskaya's, Savitskaya was the first person on the station who did an EVA within the first week of arriving on board. Before, nobody else would do that. We thought that when you arrive on board the station, you have to have a certain amount of time to adjust to microgravity. And so you would schedule an EVA at the end of the first month. And here, she had to do an EVA within her first week of being on board. You know, I can't really remember if she had a special suit or not. I'm sure she did, but either way, the EVA was very successful. Valentina was also a woman cosmonaut, but she proved herself to be just as good as everybody else who had flown before her. So I think that we're learning more and more each day, and we're getting rid of a lot of fears that maybe we had in terms of women's spaceflight before. When I was told that I would be one of the panelists in this discussion, you know, to be frank, I really didn't want to participate, because this is one of the areas where we are actually lagging behind. And it's really embarrassing because we are all following in Korolov's footsteps, and he always wanted for us to be first in space, even if it meant to send the first woman in space. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to open it up to questions now. There were 5 points that were identified as topics here. We started out with design considerations, and I hope you found from the conversation that a lot of these differences have probably no longer exist. They're blurred by other things. But we have certain examples of each one of these topics that might be on your mind or that the panelists would like to discuss. So design considerations, medical limitations, if any, weighted performance in flight, physiological adaptation, and differences in anatomy, which was discussed, and family planning, which, by the way, is conducted not just for the women, but for the men and the astronaut as well. So I'm going to open it up to the audience. We have a...
Thank you all for a very interesting overview. We seem to focus a lot, and we've learned a lot about some of the spacesuit design issues. So some of the technical engineering problems that we confront, and it seems like those are solvable. I mean, it's largely time and funding. And of course, being a physiologist, I'm much more keen to hear about the real physiological differences. And we know there are a number between the two genders. And in fact, several of us in the room participated in this last year on a, NASA had a sex and gender differences review, and there's a publication coming out very soon, I think, with the results of those workshops, which were on webinars last fall. But there's and I'm looking forward to reading all of those because I was just intimately involved in the musculoskeletal one. But even within my area, we know, there are clear gender differences. There are gender differences in cardiovascular physiology that impact, we think, on orthostatic intolerance, for example. So I would love to hear, particularly from those of you who have flown in space, what you think are relevant physiological differences, and not only in flight, in low Earth orbit, but projecting ahead to, as Chiaki mentioned, some of the muscle work differences, right? I mean, if it may be irrelevant if we have robots working with human crew, but I would love to hear your perspective on which of the physiological differences you think we need to attend to.
Why don't we start with Nicole, who also did an EVA? Because there is a training regimen to go EVA, and share what you've.
There is, but I guess I will not even pretend to know the details of studies that have gone on, but maybe it's just from I don't even know what the word is. I struggle a little bit with this because my experience on orbit has been that while there are perhaps physiological differences, which there are, the challenge is not that it's more of an issue for women than it is for men, because while there might be different ones, I think it's kind of a collective problem or opportunity that we have to solve. And so it's hard for me to say, well, wow, this is a physiological thing that's more of a challenge for a woman than a man, because there's probably some other one that's works the other way. And so I hope really that we're, like I've heard over the past day actually in the session yesterday, especially with the radiation, is that there's different impacts that may come from that exposure. But we need to look at it all. It's not that it's necessarily worse for a man or a woman. So I struggle with pointing out something in particular to give you that, through my experience on orbit, that I could say just by the 3 months I was there floating and working in station that I noticed, wow, this is so much better for me than it is for my male crewmates. I just didn't see that. And Mike Barrett is up in the back there. We shared time on space station and both times on space station. And, I guess I would ask him if he noticed anything like that too, because I'm not really posing the question, but it's just that it's really hard to point something out from that experience. Now, like Bonnie mentions, in terms of the training and the preparation for doing something like a spacewalk, which ultimately comes back to, I think, the hardware, the equipment standpoint. Certainly in the pool, in the neutral buoyancy lab where we train, in the suits, that's a much more challenging environment for everyone, in those suits, whether they fit you or not. Fortunately, the experience on orbit it's much more delightful. I mean, you are floating in that suit, you are working in that suit. The issues that you have working against gravity or drag or the positioning in the suit here in 1G, even when you're neutrally buoyant in the pool, are not present for you on orbit. There's the more subtle, okay, I've gotten moving, how do I get myself stopped? Kind of thing. And that's true for anyone. There's wow, it's so easy for me to get into this position. Now am I disoriented because I've got myself there so easily, what was to the right of me before is not anymore. And those are general concerns for anybody going out there. So I think I didn't answer your question at all. I think that what I hope comes across is that this is an opportunity. It's there are challenges, but it's for looking at how we all work in space, and what might be from a radiation standpoint and reproductive concerns for a woman, the eye challenge seems to be more dominated by issues in our male population. So there is a balance across all of this, and my hope is that we're looking at it collectively that way.
And if I might add to that, because I was on the other side of the fence at one time doing research for my doctoral degree in disuse osteoporosis, working with rats. And of course, I'm working with a lot of data points. And there's a tendency maybe to think that, well, those data points somehow translate to what we might see or how we perform. And those are totally transparent. When you're on orbit operating and working, if there's any difference in your kidney, you're not going to see it. You know, that's a physiological response. It's important to know, it's important to project, but in terms of the actual mission operations, I don't think we ever see that difference. So you want to go ahead and comment on that? Well, let's try Miyake or Chiaki, because you've done some research. Yes. Did you, to answer her question regarding physiological responses, or?
I haven't done the research yet, but of course, I think, as you pointed out, there's a gender difference exists because biologically, men and women different, hormonally, anatomically, etc. But it does not necessarily mean professionally different. So if we think about the situation related to this issue, maybe we have to think about maybe the men and women have a different ability to achieve profession. I think that sounds strange, right? Because profession-wise, it's same. But to pursue some profession, because men and women have a different body system, maybe the way to develop some countermeasures, or maybe develop some training system, especially on the ground, because heavy things is heavy for the weaker muscle person, no matter how the person is woman or man. And then also, that maybe the different approach to think about the countermeasures or risk mitigations or training issue. And also, if you take about this men and women difference a positive way, maybe take a look at the good parts of men and women and use a good part for making the system better. That's what I think. So I totally agree with you. We are different. But if we know how different we are, then we can work together and cooperate together in a better way.
Thank you.
I was really impressed, though, with a comment I think Nicole made, that there's a wide variety of responses. And in fact, in this exercise we had last year with the sex and gender differences, at least in my area that Lori Platz-Snyder chaired, we really found in examining the data that the gap, the spread of individual differences are far larger than the average gender differences. So, and we know there's huge individual variability, even within a gender, right? In changes in bone or muscle or cardiovascular capability. So understanding the individual genetic components that contribute to those differences are important. But I'm also worried about the unknown unknowns. In other words, I'm just getting into the radiation areas that impacts on bone health. And we have a huge number of unknowns about how gender influences those responses.
Well, since you brought that up, perhaps it'd be opportune for me to...
May I just add to the same question? Yeah? Я просто хочу сказать, что физиологические особенности,
physiological differences, characteristics. In order to make some conclusions here, we need some statistics. We need enough data
to select from, and it is impossible to get this data from the flights. We have just one perfect woman in space. We cannot make you responsible for everybody, an average woman on the ground. But we have been studying that from the very beginning. This question was being studied in analogs. I'm not going to talk about it, but bed rest analogs that we had, long-term and even short-terms, that we had in Russia from the very beginning of the space research era. Sometimes we were specially addressing them on men and on women. We had female groups, female subjects, to find out what the physiological differences in reaction to those conditions would be. I have to say that I participated in those experiments for 4 months. We had female subjects, a lot of women. Usually we had like 6 to 8 people. We had six females, 6 subjects in the analogs. What did we find out? We did not find different trends. There are no trends. Everything was happening the same like with men. The same changes in all functions that we were looking at. You know that the bed rests are aimed at looking at biochemistry, biology, everything, but we did not find any specific differences in women compared to men. However, some of them, I read about other female bed rest analogs. I have to say that PIs did not find any critical properties that would be of interest, that this is something that we have to pay attention. Nothing was pinpointed. The speed of degradation or recovery upon completion of the experiment was about the same as with men. And we were also paying attention mostly at the bone. We were thinking, we did not have young girls, we had middle-aged women usually. We were looking at some changes in the in the bone mass, but we didn't find any much difference. And these are already statistic data. These are not just individual data on specific subjects.
Well, thank you. I was going to mention I had the opportunity to sit on the IOM committee that recently published Health Standards for Long-Duration Exploration Spaceflight Ethics Principles, Responsibilities, and Decision Framework. It was chaired by Jeff Kahn. He's Johns Hopkins University, Berman Institute of Bioethics. And that is important because one of the cases we studied was the radiation limits. And I thought I'd just share with you a few things that we looked at because we presented a broad framework. But that broad framework was driven by the request from NASA because of this 3% limit that they were hitting. First of all, what we noticed was the large uncertainty band, 95% confidence level. When you just pick a 95% confidence level, you really constrain that average data. If you just arbitrarily decided to pick it at, let's say, 70%, you would open up the window. So the agency can do that. It's all about risk assessment and the uncertainty. But when we looked at the actual overlap of gender, there is an overlap. So it isn't male, female. It really gets down to the individual basis. And so that's why the committee recommended through the ethics framework that you identify the risk, particularly for radiation, because it's not a mission risk, it's a lifetime risk, which is unique. It's not a mission risk in terms of cancer. We're looking at the neural side of it, but from a cancer, it's a lifetime risk. And like anything else, you let the crew member know what the risks are in a very transparent manner, and they can do they decide was not called informed consent informed decision-making, because these were people that were educated and could understand risk, not a medical subject per se. And I wanted to provide that interpretation because there's a lot of stuff out on the internet right now, but that was our thinking, is that you have to customize these risks to the individual because people are different. If a woman, for example, has no history, no family history of cancer, they're going to have a different risk in looking at those numbers. If you decide to pick a confidence level that's around 70%, you open up the window for everybody. So you need to look at all of these things, but also not take that hard limit, because that was set for radiation workers, and that was never intended to be applied to human spaceflight. They also redefined astronauts not as workers, but as explorers, and that explorers always take informed risks, and it's a collective decision-making part. So I wanted to make sure I got that out there. I think the report was released in April, and if you haven't accessed it yet, it's out. You can get it. Yes.
Bonnie, can I just address one thing related to the radiation issue? If we think about the radiation issue, three things that we have to think. We have to have the good, the detector in good quality. And the second one is we have to know the biological effect. So that is the category that we have to think about the men and women differences, right? And the third one is the protection. So what if some good engineers or scientists find out the very good protection way, then the second part, the men and women difference in those levels doesn't matter anymore from the viewpoint of operation. Of course, scientifically, it is very interesting why men and women have a different sensitivity, but if we just think about the operational issue, if we have a good protection, then this issue doesn't matter.
Well, and of course, the database for that is quite a few decades old. It's not the current population. So there was a lot of questions about collecting data, increasing the N, the sample size, applying engineering solutions to some of the structures and so forth, and those are all good recommendations. I think they need to be captured. We have a question up here.
Yes, I just wonder, so far we've thought about design and performance characteristics, and it seems like the physiology we've discussed is everything below the shoulders. There's been no comment about the physiology of the brain and the behavioral approaches that may be quite different. Responses to stress, flight and fright, a tendency toward collaboration versus competition, a whole host of kinds of behavioral factors that I think you've all made the point that the physiological differences and body habitus differences can be overcome and pretty easily with design approaches. What about these other characteristics? Shouldn't they be a part of this discussion?
Stephanie, you want to?
Sure. Yes, that's a very good point, and they should be part of this discussion. And in fact, as we embarked to select the class of 2013, class of 8 astronaut candidates that recently joined NASA, as we went through that selection process, we, as a board, found that our criteria was much different than the criteria that we used to select shuttle crews for a 2-week mission. Many of these things that you mentioned, tendency to collaborate, reaction to stress. I mean, it is a stressful environment. It is very high-paced. But as you're looking towards a longer flight, a 6-month flight, or perhaps a year-long flight, you're looking perhaps for some of the similar characteristics, but in different variations. And so you really are perhaps looking for someone that has greater soft skills, someone that is able to be a little more self-sufficient, be collaborative, come up with creative ways to engage team members and work with that perhaps isolated team on a planet or on an asteroid or on the moon. And so we, as a selection committee and as an office, are looking to try to characterize the skills that we believe would be useful for long duration flight. and try to pull that into the selection process for future classes.
And I know that NASA does reach out and work with external groups to inform those processes. And just as speaking as kind of a retired old astronaut, an astronaut isn't selected and then immediately flown. They can go through a variety of training years. Typically now it's 3 or almost 4. And they're not out of college. The average age when I came on board was 33, I think. So they've had some track records behind them, and that's part of the information that's brought forward. So before they're selected, there's an assessment of their response. In fact, they're asked whether they've been in stressful situations. It's not necessary to ask the military pilots that, but a lot of the civilians you don't know. And then they're observed. We're observed during that training flow. And that's true in the Cosmonaut Corps as well. Your trainers are observing you, the medical people are observing you, and you're also going through positive training. So even though you've made it through the first filter, that's not a guarantee that you'll be selected to a flight or during that training that you'll actually get on the flight. All of those parameters are very, very important. And I've noticed, too, I was... in the era of the shuttle where we had short flights, is that how we select people and how deeply we look at those characteristics has increased with the exploration crew. Do you agree with that? Yeah.
I think it's a very important part. And then I think if somebody knows about the gene lab, I think there's a very interesting evidence about the female mice versus the male mice. Because usually we used the science community used the male mice or male rats, whatever, because their body system is simpler than the female because of the hormonal condition or something like that. But Gene Lab, I believe that they chose female mice. Do you know why? Well, what I have heard was they used the existing animal holding facility, which is designed for only 10 male mice can live together harmoniously. If we put more than 10, they start killing each other. And also their smell is so bad. But the ARC engineer mentioned that if we put 20, we can put the female mice, 20 of them, in the same device, because female mice behaves very well, and then they're not territorial, and then they're so harmonious, work each other, and they're not stinked. Smells. So, which means, I think if we maybe to explore something, we need something who has a strong sense of having territorial things, which is men. And then once we established to develop some community, we need more women to live harmoniously. So again, the behavior needs to be investigated more. Yeah, that's all. But that is evidence.
Over here.
Oh. So I just wanted to put in a shameless plug for my book. I did a chapter in there on gender differences, and I have to say, doing the research for that was fascinating. But I would just support the comment that basically you choose individuals. We don't choose genders. So I mean that's the ultimate summation. But these differences really are fascinating. Although on an individual level they turn out to be relevant.
Yeah, well, it is my hope that from now on that we don't need a gender panel, that we can start looking at integrated data. After 50 years, I think it's about time.
Yeah,
Go
yeah. Развернувшаяся дискуссия, она и ваш вопрос.
This discussion and the question you addressed to us, which is quite appropriate,
заставила меня
makes me
я сидела и
wonder
о том, как много
about something,
вопросов на самом
and that
деле
is how many
еще мы
questions
имеем.
are there
Как часто мы
posed
забываем,
before us
что
that we
мы
haven't even
знаем малость,
reached yet, let
а не
alone answer.
не знаем вот столько.
We know this little, and there's so
И
much
это касается
that
не
we
только
don't know yet,
женщин
and
и
that
мужчин.
goes well beyond the male
А это
versus
нас
female
жизнь учит.
issue. It's that
Вот я
life
хочу
itself
сказать
is the
один
great
пример.
teacher.
У нас
And I can
летал
give you one
один
example. We had this one
блестящий
cosmonaut who was a brilliant
Летал длинный полет.
cosmonaut. He was there for the long haul,
И все было
long
отлично,
duration
и
mission, and
готовился.
everything
И
was
сам он, в
A-okay,
общем,
both during
вот это была
training
его жизнь,
and
полететь,
whatever.
и он
And it
полетел.
was what
И
he
в
was
этом
all about,
длинном
flying in
полете
space.
что-то произошло. Я не
Then
хочу
something
на
happened
этом
in
говорить,
this
но
long
что-то
duration flight.
произошло
Something happened. I don't
в ходе
know
этого
what,
полета неблагоприятное для него.
something that was not so
Где-то это было в
favorable in his
середине
personal
уже его
case, and it was more like towards the
И
central midpoint of his
реакция
mission.
на то, что произошло, не
And
критичная, не
his
то, что не
response to
смертельная,
something that happened that was
но
not
неприятная,
anything
была
life-threatening, but it was
что мы
unpleasant.
вынуждены были человека
Nevertheless,
посадить.
so we had to land him,
Мы прервали
was the
полет.
situation. We actually disrupted the
Потому
flight,
что физиологически,
mid-mission, and we landed him.
Он просто
Not
сорвался.
physiologically, but his
Он не мог больше
health
заниматься,
condition-wise,
а без занятий
he
человек не может
basically
летать. И мы вынуждены
let
были
his hair
его
down.
посадить.
He wasn't able to
И когда
continue his
мы
mission, so we were
анализировали,
forced to land him.
вы понимаете сами,
And
что
when
там
we
были
analyzed
применены
this,
все
you
возможные
have to
силы,
realize
и
that we
проанализировано
incorporated
было
everything
всё.
that was at our
Потому что
disposal
сам
to
человек вообще
examine what
чрезвычайно
had happened,
пострадал.
because the
И
person
когда
had
он
suffered
был потом
greatly,
на земле,
both when
вот я к этому
during flight when we made that
оказалась в
decision and
какой-то
when
мере
he
причастна,
came
потому
back,
что
and I
я ставила
played part
вопрос
in
о
it
том, что он
because
должен быть
I was the one
приземлен, потому что он не
who
может продолжать
said that he needed to be
нагрузки. Он не
brought
может
back because
принять
he's not
нагрузки.
carrying the load anymore. He's not capable
Мы для него
of
были просто врагами,
handling it. So we were
которые
his
испортили
foes.
ему жизнь. Но и кроме
Use the
того,
mildest
нанесли
language
ущерб
possible,
стране,
because
потому
we
что
made him suffer, and we,
и посылка другого человека,
it was basically
это
something
большая
that didn't do the honor to our country, as some thought.
потери экономии,
It was savings-wise, cost-wise, we were losing greatly. But then the end result,
это не догадки, а это то,
and
к
this is
чему
no
мы
guesswork,
пришли.
this is
Все
basically what we
специалисты
arrived at, all the
рассматривали всё, что
specialists
произошло,
together
и
when we
все
were jointly
части
analyzing the
имеют со
situation
стороны
and all
его
the
реакции на это.
components of his
Мы
response to the
забыли об
flight
одном
and what happened during flight.
качестве
There was
человека,
one little
который очень хорошо
human trait that we
знают
let out of sight that
Вы знаете,
athletes are
что в
well aware
спорте
of.
отбор
You know
идет
that
более
when you're an
жесткий,
athlete, the
потому что
elimination is
большой чемпионат
hardcore,
это большие
and for you to
деньги.
get qualified
Поэтому отбор
is
ребят
as challenging
на
as
те
it
или
gets
другие
because there's so
виды
much
спорта,
money
отбор в ходе
in the
в
game. When
команду
all the selection
и так далее.
processes and such,
Это очень специальная
it's
вещь.
very
И там хорошо
special.
знали физиологи.
And the
Существует
physicians
старая,
knew that
существует
they are the short-term and then the
и
long-term runners.
все их системы регуляции
And all their
настроены совершенно
systems are
различно.
fine-tuned very differently from one another.
Дает
When you're
сильнейшую
running a
реакцию
sprint,
сходу.
you get that
зато
boost
эти
right off the bat,
реакции
right out the
длинные.
gate. But they can't last. Whereas a
На все
marathon runner,
ситуации. Это
in
не
any given
женщина, это не
situation,
мужчина.
whether it's a female or a
И те, и
male,
другие.
regardless, both,
Но
that
стайер
is.
развивает реакции медленно.
But the marathon runner will
Постепенно
take his
и
time
держит
developing his
достигнуть
responses, and once you get to the
сколько-
plateau, you'll
сколько
stay there
необходимо.
for as long as you need to,
Вот наши
for the long run.
стайеры, которые
So
бегают на
our
длинные
marathoners
дистанции,
that do the long hauls, all their physiological systems are fine-tuned, adjusted and fine-tuned. All the control systems are, and then the sprinters obviously they develop crazy speeds right out the gate. So this cosmonaut was designed for a sprint. He was born for shuttles, basically. He would have pulled 100 missions, and he would have probably been like the most stellar astronaut. But we launched him for the first time, no prior flight experience. We just basically dumped him into a long haul, where he was supposed to be a marathon runner, but he wasn't. He never had been. And the reason I'm saying this is because it's really hard to see these qualities, even if we try to do this as an outset, because even males versus females, these differences are one thing, but then even within one gender you have a plethora of difference. And I was reading about marathons and sprints and how people are preconditioned differently. And then I realized that it goes beyond just the Russian literature on the subject, because I read some American work. You know, everybody who is in human flight, you know, our cosmonauts and astronauts' responses are different because they're in different athletic subcategories, quote unquote. And we don't know anything about this. We haven't gotten anywhere near knowing anything about it.
Well, I think with that, I'll just briefly summarize and say, first of all, I'm very delighted to have the panel that we had today, the questions that we had. I've made a list. I hope you've made a list. We want to pick, as was termed yesterday, the A team to go forward. It doesn't matter where they're coming from. We need to look at the individuals. We need to look from the head down. We need to give them the best tools they can to do the best job. So with that, please thank my panel.
Very glad to finish.
We'll be adjourning for lunch, and lunch will be served out in the main area.